I'm Liz Eggleston, and I run Course Report, which is a resource for students who are choosing a coding boot camp. If you haven't looked at Course Report yet, this is my one shameless plug. I do it in all of our videos. You can use our directory to find schools that fit your learning style. You can check out our blog for interviews with students and instructors like this one at boot camps around the world. We've got application tips and virtual classroom tours and so much more. And if you've been researching coding boot camps this year, or you're just kind of researching the path to getting into tech, you've definitely come across SQL, which is a language that's used to query and manage data in a database. But we wanted to kind of put SQL into context. We've done articles before about what it is and what the salary is if you learn it, things like that. But today we're going to talk about how it's actually used on the job. So Hector Arias, who is an instructor at Sabio, which is a coding bootcamp in California, Hector is here to talk with us talk all the way through with SQL. We're going to talk about what it is, who uses it, and how it's used specifically by a few different types of developers. So Hector, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone.
So I've got a bunch of questions for you, but I wanted to kind of start by asking you to tell us about your background. So how did you actually get into tech? Did you take a traditional path here, or?
No, my path is not traditional at all. I went to school, I majored in physics, but I've always been fascinated with music. So I ended up, after I finished, I ended up actually gigging as a musician for a while. So I kind of left that in the past. Many years later, I came back to doing development. I always liked the logic, the thrill that you get from programming. And my wife actually is a programmer too. So it's kind of, I saw it every day and I was like, yeah, I got to get back to it.
Amazing. And I mean, there are a few boot camps out there now, over 500 on Course Report, not a trivial number of schools. Like, what brought you to Sabio and what kind of stands out to you about Sabio?
There's many things that are really good about Sabio. I think one of the main things is the training on the technologies. Like there's not a lot of places that actually train .NET. That's something that is very peculiar. .NET for a lot of people, cringe, because it's an old technology. Microsoft too. A lot of people are opinionated about that. But it's still a standard in the industry and very used, and there's not a lot of training for it. So that's one of the major things that about Sabio. The other thing too is that the training process too is I like the project part of it, which is basically after a couple of weeks of standard training. We have an entrepreneur that basically has some idea to build some project, and we build it for he or she. And that gives the students a huge experience, because you're not working on some homework. It's not your project. It's not your pet project. You're actually having to interact with someone that wants some things done a certain way. You need to learn how to listen to the client, to put it into a project, to collaborate with other people. So it ends up being very useful. And obviously, we have a huge community of graduates, and there's a lot of help that comes after the program too. So very successful, and I would recommend a lot.
Yeah, most boot camps are project-based, but Sabio really, students are working on that real-world project, which is really cool experience. So we're here to talk about SQL. So let's start with the basics. What is SQL?
What the actual SQL, what it actually means, structured query language, right? So basically, it's just a programming language assigned to manage data held in a relational database. That's it. Now, What is a relational database? Just to put it into context, it's basically a database that stores data in the form of tables. Very common. It's been around for many, many years. And basically, this is the language that allows you to make queries or do things with the data that's been stored in these kind of databases.
Cool. And when do you teach SQL in the Sabio curriculum? I guess I'm curious if this is something that is like one of the first things a new developer learns, or if it's more advanced and you're learning it towards the end of the curriculum.
No, it is in the very basics part. The cool thing about SQL is that, in a sense, it's kind of unrelated to everything else, right? It's just managing data and being able to grab data and do something with it. So it is very easy for someone who has not done any development to kind of wrap their heads around it. It's very simple. I always say, and this is, I always tell people that are kind of afraid of it, hey, if you've used Excel before and you've kind of stored information in tables, you're going to find a little bit of familiarity with it. Obviously, people who have worked with Excel or something like that, and they actually done some more advanced stuff with it, can relate to, hey, I can do something with the data that is in there, and I can grab some information in different ways. It's the same thing. It's very, very similar. So people have a easy transition into it initially. I'm not saying that it is easy, because like everything, you can get very complicated with things. But generally speaking, at least the introduction, the visualization of the data is it's easy for the students initially.
I love that you mentioned that SQL is almost unrelated to other programming languages, because I think especially in 2020, as folks are thinking, oh, what's a tech skill that I could like add to my toolbox, but maybe I'm not ready for a complete career change into becoming a developer. Like SQL seems perfect for that, especially if you are already using Excel in your job. It could just be something to kind of add on to your stack. What types of developers, or even just tech roles, careers, are using SQL? Could you talk through a few of those?
Yeah, so there's a lot. I mean, and not necessarily developers. So examples, for example, in Sabio would be web development, right? We in Sabio do web development, so web developers will use SQL. Database administrators need to use SQL, so the people that are in charge of that the data is secure and everything is good and running. A data analyst, which would be someone that would actually do something with the data, right? Figure out what to do with the data, like give some predictions or do some kind of analysis with it. Quality assurance people that are just, that they need to check some data and verify that things are working. Managers, right? Like a manager can go and look it up and basically kind of create their own report without having to talk to someone else like an actual developer. Business analysts is another thing. So there's a lot of people. This is pure data that you can manipulate and use and grab, and so it's up to the person how you want to use the data. So there's a lot of different possibilities of people that can actually use SQL.
Okay, cool. So do you want to give us a few examples of how some of those roles would use SQL?
So very good. So let's say, I don't know when you're going to be watching this video, but this is December 2020, meaning that there was just an election like a month ago. So there was a lot of talk on TV, a lot of people on TV talking about the data that was captured during the election. So let's say we are let's say the state that manages the election, whatever state it is. I don't know, we're Hawaii. And let's say we're capturing data from all of the voters. And for the purposes of simplicity, I just basically created a table to store the gender of the person who voted, the voting district, the age, and the presidential candidate. Okay, so basically every single person went, voted, we tallied the votes, and we have some information gathered into our database. That's it. So if we basically look at the data, we would see something like that. As I said, it's a table. It's a table with columns and rows. Columns meaning each one of the particular things that we're actually trying to store, like a gender, a voting district, an age, and a presidential candidate. Okay, now, what can we do with this data? So let's start with, let's say, a web developer, which is what we do at Sabio. So we probably have a site, right? We probably have a site where we want to show the results, right? We want to show the results. Maybe we want to show who's up, who's down. Maybe we want to show what the average age of the people who voted was, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe we have race or ethnicity and we want to show that, or maybe we want to show that this was in a suburb, et cetera, et cetera. We can create a simple query, or that we would, for example, this one right here that I'm going to execute. And this basically is just going to give me what is the average of age of the people who voted in this particular case, right? So out of the 20 possible voters, I can grab and I can get that information. So the age is 39. So the web developer will do, depending on their technology, the technology that they use, let's say it's a .NET developer or a Node developer, they would create some kind of API that they can access this information. They would create a data layer service that would actually access this information. And they would create an API that you can actually access, and you can basically call from your website and display this information on the site. Okay, that would be a simple example for what a web developer would do with this information.
And even within web development, like for example, Sabio teaches Node and .NET, but those two types of developers would be using SQL in the same way, or would it actually look different for two different types of developers?
No, that's a great question. Exactly the same way. They would be using SQL the exact same way. So any kind of training that you have in SQL will transfer to many applications. So if you are looking to add something to your toolbox of things to learn, this is great, because as you said, it's not dependent on the technology, meaning a .NET developer or a Node developer. The query that they would actually be creating would be exactly the same. They just handle the information in a different way in the middle tier, and then obviously the front end would be other thing, but they would manage this information exactly the same.
Right. So then if they're going to like write an API to then use that data, that would be where the language differs.
Exactly. That's exactly correct. But the API would be different. Yeah, that's correct. Let's say you're the database administrator. You want to make sure that your database is secure, that nobody's going to hack it, that the people that are using it have the right credentials, that the actual architecture of this database is actually nice and reusable, et cetera, et cetera. So there's another way of using SQL. Now, a data analyst, right? So let's see a data analyst. What can you do with this data? So data analysts are more, let's say, into the math realm, right? More in the analytics of the data. So something that a data analyst can do is grab this information and put it into a piece of paper and tell my producer on TV that this happened, right? So for example, something that would be kind of data analystly would be, hey, what is the percentage of people that voted for Clinton during this election, right? So I can create a little query that will tell me, hey, 45% of the people of males voted for Clinton. Now you can do the same thing for female. You can do it based on race, on the age, on whatever you want to do. The other thing that you can do with this data is create projections, right? That is kind of part of the data analyst world, to grab the data and let's say they have projections for depending on the districts, et cetera, who's going to be projected winner after we counted a certain amount percent, right? It's all kind of based on math, saying, hey, we have a 20% of the people have already voted, or 95% of the people have already voted. This means that there is no possible way that the other candidate can win, so we can actually tell you who is the winner, right? So that's kind of another way of seeing things. Obviously, if you are a business manager or let's say even an election analyst, you can use this information and do the queries with the data and kind of figure out different things. Like, let's say I want to know, and these are simple things, right? Get the average of age for the males that voted. Get the, I don't know how many women, how many men voted, the percentage, et cetera, et cetera. It's a very useful tool and very used tool. It's been around for many, many years. And the reason it's been around for many, many years is because you can grab data and do something with it that will be useful. It's very common that, for example, someone does not want to wait for a report. Let's say someone actually needs a report, and this person, this could be the business manager or business analyst or whoever it is, as long as they have access and they have the credentials to do that, they can write some queries like this one without having to wait for someone else to do it for them. And they can just grab and query whatever they need. And obviously, the better they are at it, the better information they're going to get, the more precise information they're going to get. But yeah, I mean, they can just use it. If they know the language, they can go ahead and do whatever they want. So this is not really, as you said, this is not really very specific to developers. This is a very useful tool in the world of business and any kind of company.
That's awesome. So many different types of roles could kind of interact with the same data, just in different ways, but all using SQL.
Yes, that's correct. So as I said, it's just, it's very, very useful, very old, but very useful tool. And as I said, language is kind of easier for let's say novice developers or people who are not really used to seeing code, because the language is easy. So for example, just by looking at this one, select, right? You don't need, there's no weird word. Select the average age, that's age right there from DBO voting example. That would be the only thing that is weird, but that's just referring to the table where we store the information. But that's it. Right. Like if you ask someone, hey, how do you get that's that simple. Select the average age from that table and you get the result. You just execute it, hit play, and it's there. So that's one of the reasons why it's been out for so long, because of its simplicity, and it's very easy to learn initially.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, thank you for sharing those examples with us. So are there any like alternatives to SQL?
What we saw right now is Microsoft's version of SQL, right? Again, there are other alternatives. It's very popular, MySQL. Mostly the differences between them is obviously syntax. There are some syntax differences, but the main differences between these called SQL databases are basically if they're open source or if they're not open source, what kind of operating system do you need to have them hosted in, if it has to be a Windows, Linux, et cetera, et cetera. Those are the main differences, but there are a lot of different options. Postgres is another one. It's another relational open source database. SQLite is another relational database, but that's kind of contained into a C library. There's Oracle, Mongo. Now Mongo is a little different. That's what we call a NoSQL database. So yeah, there's different alternatives for sure. But I want to say if you work with some relational database like the Microsoft SQL version of it, working with other relational databases or switching to using other ones is going to be easy because there's a lot of things that translate.
Okay, that's a really good point. So as a developer, you kind of choose which database querying languages to use based on pretty much the language or dev environment that you're using?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
So basically, I want to say most of those are more architectural decisions, right? Before you actually start on a project or doing something, you want to make sure that basically where you can actually host your server, et cetera, what is better for your technology. So that's more, I would say, more of an architectural decision. But as I said, generally speaking, these things translate pretty good.
All right. And I guess we can kind of wrap it up with your favorite resources. So people are always asking us, where should I start? Do you have any favorite kind of resources for beginners who want to get started in SQL at Sabio or otherwise?
One of the most common resources would be the SQL Authority. So if you've heard of that, it's one of the most researched or looked at resources, and this is a website that has blogs, has their blogs and books, et cetera. So if you've done a little bit of SQL, you know who the SQL Authority is. And I would definitely go and check it out for sure. Obviously, when you're learning by yourself, you can find many things online, et cetera. To have more formal training, obviously, going to a boot camp like we are would be very good, especially if you're thinking about transitioning and actually making that change of career with a lot more training and help.
Amazing. Okay, the SQL Authority. Well, I think that is a great place to end. So thank you so much, Hector, for joining us and walking us through SQL, how a few different folks in tech would use SQL on the job. Any students at Sabio would obviously be very lucky to have you as an instructor. So we appreciate you teaching us something today. And
thank you very much.
Of course. And thank you everyone for joining. Let us know in the comments what language or technology you'd like to see us break down next. We'll see you on the next one. Bye.